Hi, my name is Stephanie Erldacher-Fox. I am the scientific director of HOTITSEDA, which is a strategic patient-oriented research support unit located in the Northwest Territories and hosted by the Clecho government. So it's great to be here and to be part of the Research Cache series of webinars that are intended to assist individuals and organizations from the Northwest Territories to be able to submit and be successful at funding proposals to various funders, including Tri-Council funders, which include the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and the National Science and Engineering Council. So today I'm sharing a presentation with you, which really sets out some of the basics for pulling everything together. Now that you've been through a series of webinars and discussions in relation to the CASH initiative, you're in a good position now to think about how do you take all of these different elements of developing a research proposal and bring them together into a final package to be able to submit to funders, as well as to provide to partners who will be involved in the research, and as a basis for briefing materials and developing new partnerships during your project going forward. So the presentation I'll give today, first I'll talk a little bit about HOTITSEDA, of which I am scientific director, and then I will get into going through the various parts of the proposal development process and how you will pull that all together into your final package for submission. So HOTITSEDA is a Clecho phrase, which means working together for good health in a way that we leave each other in a state of grace. The unit is hosted by the Clecho government and is focused on bringing people into the Northwest Territories into research that's being done in the Northwest Territories in a good way. Partners that HOTITSEDA works with have indicated that when we talk about patients in the Northwest Territories, we mean everyone. So instead of talking about patients, HOTITSEDA talks about people and about partners. So there is a support unit in every territory and every province in Canada. The one in the Northwest Territories, HOTITSEDA, is the only one that focuses exclusively on Indigenous health and Indigenous health research. And when we talk about health research in the Northwest Territories, again, partners of HOTITSEDA see health research as really research about almost everything, because health, of course, is holistic and everything is connected. So the vision of HOTITSEDA is to try to promote a health research landscape or ecosystem that's rooted in Indigenous knowledges of the Indigenous people who are in the Northwest Territories, that it's responsive to communities and to the priorities of Indigenous governments and Indigenous communities, that it's built on relationship. So we do work that promotes better relationships between researchers and Indigenous communities by respecting, for example, community self-determination and community control of research, and supporting things like cultural safety and cultural competency training for researchers who come into the Northwest Territories from other parts of Canada and other parts of the world. We also hope to contribute to creating a culturally safe health system. So health research, of course, is always meant to improve not only the health of individuals and communities, but the way that health programs and services are approached by providers. So this results in goals of HOTITSEDA being providing supports and funding and advice and advocacy in ways that involves community members at all stages of health research, from the idea stage to funding and doing the research and then reporting on the research, supporting research that responds to needs of communities. So needs that are identified in community health plans, that might be identified in territorial health priority plans and documents. Also to try to make sure that health research findings influence public policy, or the way that the health system does its job in the Northwest Territories. Another element of the health research ecosystem that Hoditseita contributes to is supporting training. So the education of individuals from the Northwest Territories, getting education in health careers, so doctors, nurses, social workers, and other related fields. And also, as I mentioned previously, promoting cultural safety and cultural competency in health research, but also in health program and service delivery. And finally, making sure that Hoditseita can play a role in connecting researchers who want to do research and communities that want research done, so that partners can find each other and conduct research in a good way. So now I'll get into the presentation that focuses on the proposal development. So the first thing you need to think about, of course, is your idea. So at this point in the CASH series of webinars and discussions, you will probably have already begun to think about and have a well-developed research idea. So when we're looking about writing that up in a proposal, you really need to be able to talk about in a way that is plain language. You need to be able to be succinct. So in one sentence or a few sentences, be able to express the real, the heart of the research that you want to do. What is your focus? And how can you explain that in a way that pretty much anyone would be able to understand? The other thing that you need to be able to do at this point is understand and be able to talk about in a well-informed way who has already done research work in this area or in areas related to the research idea that you have. Another thing that you should have a really good sense of by this point is who are the people, who are the organizations and possibly communities that could work with you to help take your research project from an idea all the way to making it a reality. So being able to effectively communicate your idea is really important, because if you can explain in a very clear, concise, and plain language way what you're talking about, that provides other people with the ability to understand what it is your focus is, and also the ability to relate that to their own research interests, to what their own organizations do, to what their own communities are interested in terms of research priorities. So it allows people to get a really strong sense of the idea. It also allows you to talk with people to help refine your idea. So through conversations that you'll probably have with partners, your ability, the more you talk about your idea, the better your ability will be to be able to explain your idea in a really clear and simple and concise way. So when you're explaining your idea, you need to think about, how does this sound to elders? How would it sound to an Indigenous language translator? What are some of the questions they might ask me so that they could translate this into their language? How would youth or communities see my research idea? And how would I talk about it if I were talking to youth or if I were talking to leadership? So thinking about your research idea from these different perspectives allows you to actually think about what might resonate or be of interest to different people. So when you're going through this process, it might help for you to talk with individuals. It might help for you to write it out. It might help for you to write it and then read it out loud and see how you sound. So you really need to think about, how do I talk about this? How do I explain it? And once you have that done, everything else will become a whole lot easier. And it will also help you, because you've thought about it in different ways, it will help you to answer questions that people might have about your research idea. Another important area of refining and understanding your idea is understanding how it relates to other research that is done. So I have a number of times seen researchers or organizations go into communities or present ideas to communities, and some members in the community or in the meeting may say, you know what, people have researched that idea about 5 times now. What makes your project different? And if you don't know the answer to that, what makes your project different? How does your project relate to other research that's already been done? This might lead people to believe that maybe this has been done already and you simply haven't done your homework. There's also a very strong sense of people out there that they have been, quote, researched to death. So this means that people have seen lots of different researchers come and go, oftentimes researching what seems to be the same thing. And in some cases, they don't hear from them again. So there's this sense of, if you're coming to our community, why are you doing research in an area that may have been researched before? Are you aware of that research? How are you building on that research? And can you tell us what the results were of that research? Because a lot of times people will not have heard back from researchers. So when you're going into a community in particular, and I always find talking with elders and talking with leaders, they have a very good understanding and an understanding of the history and what has gone before in terms of research in various areas. So they probably will come to the meeting with thoughtful and very well-informed questions about the research done in their own community. They might also want to know how your research relates to things that are important to the community. So for example, if you're doing research in a community that was highly impacted by a big mining project, for example, and you're doing research in health, they might want to ask you questions about how will your research in health also take account for the health impacts of that big mining project that the community experienced. So it's important to understand the context, and it's important for you to educate yourself. You can't go into a community and expect to take up people's time with them educating you on what might have happened in your community. You should start with doing peer-reviewed research, literature reviews if you can, looking at the gray literature, that's websites of governments or community organization or Indigenous governments, and seeing what they might have that relates to your research project. Or simply, what's important to those communities? What are the sorts of things that those communities have experienced that might have a bearing on your research? And then from there, you'll be able to inform your project and prepare yourself for talking to people about what is important to them and talking about your research from their perspective. The next big area here is who could work with you to make your idea a reality. Doing that literature review, which is academic articles, or the gray literature, which is reports, and then also even doing a Google search. Are there news stories about the community or about that subject area that might relate to what the community is interested in or the experiences that they have had? Doing all of that background will also give you clues to who might work with you. So if your research idea relates to a project that might be happening in a community, a program or service of an Indigenous government in a community, then you know, okay, there might be a partner there who might be interested in supporting this research, or perhaps being a champion of the research within their organization or region or community, who might make introductions for you. You should also think about, what are your existing relationships? Should you start with a community you've already worked with? Or should you really be looking at a community that you don't have a relationship in? And how would that work? You should also be thinking about who might fund this. You should also be thinking about who might have an interest in this and might think that I'm working in the same area as them. It's really important to approach research in ways that are respectful. And if you present a research project without acknowledging that others have done research in the same area, or that they have an interest in what you're interested in doing research in, that might not be taken in a good way. It might be taken as being less respectful than you could be of the work that other people are doing or that other people might have done. So being open in that sense and reaching out to people could really help build support and build understanding of your idea and the kind of research that you want to do. This is where discussion and collaborative thinking comes in. So when you are talking with potential partners, you'll be able to share with them. Here is the information that I've found about who has already done work in this area. You should be able to explain what work have they done And how does it fit with your idea? What were their findings? Are you building on their findings? Or are you saying something such as, they did research similar to this, but they used a method that resulted in specific findings. I think my method is different, or I think my partners might lead to different conclusions if I do research work with them. The other thing you really need to underline is whether your research fills a gap. Research might have been done about feet, research might have been done about hands, but there's no research about shoulders. So I'm filling a gap there. These are the kinds of things that you're going to have to be able to say when you're in discussion with people about why your research is important and how it fits with research programs, services, elements of subject area interest that might already have been done. You should also think about whether this is an opportunity to expand your network. So it's great to work within existing relationships, and it's wonderful to have long-term, well-established relationships. If you're doing great research and if your projects go well, it's also an opportunity for you to approach other communities, other organizations, other individuals and say, I have a track record and I've been able to accomplish some things, and I'd like to broaden that, or I'd like to go in a different direction, and be able to frame your approach to new relationships with respect to how you think you might benefit those organizations or individuals, and how they might bring resources, expertise, and a different dimension to the research or the network involved in the research that you're thinking about doing. One really important element here is understanding research protocols, how to work with Indigenous governments, and how to make sure that what you're doing is fully respectful and consistent and meets the standards of research ethics. So when you are pitching your research idea or talking to people about it, it's important that you do pay attention to ethics. One thing you can start with, for example, if you're working in a region, look at the different Indigenous governments' websites and find out if they have traditional knowledge policies, if they have research policies. Understand what the local protocols are. How do you go about doing research here? And how do you go about doing it respectfully in ways that are ethical and in ways that follow the expectations and the requirements of Indigenous governments and communities? So for some communities, particularly if you are expanding your research network and building new relationships, or if you're working in the same community but working with different partners, going to visit, being there face-to-face, or during COVID, perhaps on Zoom, brokered by a trusted person in the community, would be ways that you can start to establish those relationships and spend time listening, trying to understand in your broad area of interest, what are people there interested in? What are their priorities? What are their concerns? And what are their expectations in terms of how research can be done, how it should be done, and how they should be involved at every stage of the research. You also need to take time to research and understand what your responsibilities are. So if traditional knowledge policies put responsibility on researchers to do certain things, you need to think about, how do I integrate that into my research proposal at every step of the way? Also, if you're working through a university, you'll have to go through your research ethics board. What does that look like? And you need to understand, does that meet the same standard, ethical standards, as what is in traditional knowledge policies or the protocols of communities? And how will you reflect your responsibilities there in the research ethics approval application that you provide to your university? If you don't work through a university, Aurora College in the Northwest Territories does have a research ethics board, and that's something that you can always go to, review their guidelines, talk to people there, and try to understand what's happening. I encourage you at every stage when thinking about research ethics, talk to people, talk to elders, talk to cultural knowledge holders, talk to people at your university ethics office, and also the Aurora College Research Ethics Board. So at this point, you would have spent a lot of time talking to people, thinking about, what is my research? Where does it fit? Who can I work with? Who might fund me? who might want to be part of this? Are there other people who've done research in this area? What were their results and what were their experiences? Are there any organizations out there that would want to contribute funding to this? And are there any Indigenous experts or Indigenous academics or non-Indigenous academics who may want to partner with me? Particularly when you're applying for funding with Tri-Council funders, they often like to see partnerships. So if you can have a blend of academics and cultural knowledge holders, that always gives the research, the Tri-Council funders confidence in your ability to establish and maintain relationships, and also that you have the confidence to draw on different types of expertise and that you're willing to collaborate and work with people who have knowledge and experience in your area. If you're working in the Northwest Territories with an Indigenous community and you are Indigenous, you also have an opportunity there to push funders to acknowledge and recognize cultural knowledge holders' knowledge, the importance of that and the value of that. So you shouldn't think that it's necessary to have to partner with the university. There are also some Indigenous governments and organizations in the Northwest Territories that can receive funding straight from Tri-Council. So finding out about whether the communities and Indigenous governments that you work with or their regional organization has what's called eligibility for Tri-Council funding is an important step for you to be able to make sure that if you can apply without having to go through a university, that you know how to partner, and if you need to partner with the organization that holds that eligibility here in the Northwest Territories. So sometimes, as opposed to a conversation, you might have to go into a more formal process. If you're asking for money, for example, organizations might have their own application forms. They might want you to do a presentation. They might want you to talk with people responsible for deciding about funding or making recommendations about it. It's really important that you come forward with a clear idea. And often writing this out or rehearsing a verbal presentation is really important for you so that you can communicate effectively. And you should also be able to provide pretty significant detail. If you know who your partners are, if you know the research you want to do, you need to have a sense of how is this all going to work in practice when I walk into the community to start my research or go into that organization to start my research. What's going to happen? So you should have an idea of timelines. When are you going to start? When are you going to stop? What are the milestones along the way? What are the goals and the outcomes that you think you will achieve? Goals are what you want to achieve. Here are the 3 things that are going to happen. I am going to understand what a shoulder is. I'm going to understand who has shoulders, and I'm going to understand how we use shoulders. Those would be your goals. The outcomes might be something like, I talk to a lot of people about shoulders and they understand lots of things about shoulders now that they didn't know before. 50 people attended my meeting where we talked about shoulder anatomy, and another 75 people were able to participate in an art class where they described what their shoulders felt like, and that contributed to the research. So you need to understand and separate out what are the goals here and what are some of the outcomes that will probably be achieved. You need to talk about where you're doing research. So what's the geographic area? Which communities? Who are the target audiences that are going to be involved? And also, who are you applying to funding for? So if you do go to a funder and ask them for all of the money, they may say to you, are you applying to anyone else? Or if you are applying to other people, you should be able to explain why you're only applying for part of the funding and what your expectations are for being successful from other funders. You also should be able to show partners, how is this going to benefit them? Why should they spend money on this project? How do your goals and your outcomes align with the kind of goals and outcomes, the mission or the vision of the organization that you're pitching this to, or their funding opportunities that you're applying for? You also need to understand the organizations you're asking for money. What are their goals? What's their mission? And you need to understand their funding application processes. You need to understand, do they have forms? Do they have deadlines? Do I have to have other funding sources? So make yourself familiar with all those things. When you approach partners or people who might want to be part of your research, you really need to look at what they might want to do, but also what are you comfortable with? Are these organizations or partners people who are well established? Are they well known? Do they have a track record? Sometimes people will talk about what they think they can do or what they see themselves as doing, but you need to ask them questions like, what reports have you produced? Did you go back to the community and provide them with results? Do you have partnerships with other communities? So in other words, understand who you're working with, understand who they're accountable to, and understand if they have a good reputation. You also need to think about your research from their point of view. And you need to think about the research in terms of how will working with other partners individually benefit this project overall? Do they have money to bring to the table? Do they have a good track record of working with other organizations and supporting other research? You also need to know your limits. I've seen research projects that will have dozens and dozens of partners or collaborators who are listed. And if you look at that, sometimes when you're a person who's a peer reviewer, for example, reviewing a funding proposal, you think to yourself, this person's going to spend more time just doing outreach and reporting to their partners or trying to get their partners involved than they will have time to spend on the research itself. So oftentimes it's good to have a broad network, but you also need to think about, do I need more than 2 partners? Do I need more than 6? Do I need more than 10? What does the funder want to see? Will I have funding available or personnel available to the project to be able to manage this partnership? So that's something that you really need to think about. And so you need to really think about who are the people you want to bring into this project. Also, you need to think about getting input on your idea. Not everyone's always open to have different people weighing in on how things should be. So when you start, if you're engaging with partners, you can't feel offended or upset if people want to change your original idea or focus. But again, you can be choosy about what feedback you take. If it's feedback from someone who you respect, from someone with a track record, from someone who is well respected and well known by others who you respect, it's worth taking their ideas into account. Finally, any kind of partnership needs to be respectful, it needs to be collaborative, and it needs to be culturally safe. So if you're feeling like there are partners within the partnership who need to learn more about that, it's important to have those hard conversations and have them as early as possible. So when you're actually filling out your application form, at this point, you should know who your partners are, what your idea is. You should have a really good sense of all the different elements, and you need to write it up to actually submit to the funder. So you start by doing a thorough review of what they want. Go through every question on their application, make sure you understand it. And if you have any questions, you need to ask. If you're submitting through a university, their deadline will be earlier than the Tri-Council funding deadline, sometimes weeks, sometimes a month or so earlier. So it's important that you organize your time with that in mind. Reach out, try to find examples of successful applications. There's no point reinventing the wheel. If someone has been funded already and you're able to look at their successful application, I really advise you to do so. It will help you to understand the kind of writing that is successful, and also will give you ideas about how you need to explain your project, maybe some things that you should include about your project, and maybe some things that won't be important to this funder based on what they funded in the past. You can also ask other people to edit. I always have other people look at my work. If I'm applying through a university, usually the research office will do this, but not every research officer is willing or able or has the time to put the same care and attention into every research proposal. So it's important that you, if you can, give your research proposal to someone you know will take a red pen to it, who will look for the details and who will copy edit. And also ask people who might have bigger ideas. Are your conceptual ideas sound? Is your literature review really thorough? Are you missing citations or other projects that were done that you weren't aware of? Any input will just strengthen your proposal. So this is not a time to go in feeling like you can't handle criticism or that you're defending your proposal. You need to sort of put your ego aside and think about, if I want to get the money, this has to be as best as it can be. And I don't have all of the knowledge or all the information. Other people can help me, and be open to that as much as you can. In order to get that editing done, you have to write a full, complete draft ahead of the deadline. So you can send it out to people and say, hey, can you take a look at this and have it back to me within a reasonable time frame? So making a quality ask of people. If you know that one person you're sending it to is great with concepts and knows the literature, but they're not going to copy edit, ask them for that input. I'd like your ideas. Do I have all of the references that I should have? Make a quality ask, give them a deadline, thank them before they respond to you, thank them after they respond to you. And if there are ways for you to acknowledge people who have contributed to your proposal, you should do so. The other thing you have to do is plan your time. On the day of the deadline and the day before, clear your schedule. Focus completely on this application if you're able to. Otherwise, and I've done this myself, you might be up all night and part of the next day getting something in, particularly if you have partners and they're relying on you to get it done. It's really awful to let people down and for a research project not to go ahead simply because you didn't plan ahead. The budget on all research proposals are actually really important. When you're applying for funding, you have to be able to be really clear about how you reached your numbers. Get estimates from vendors. Those are people who will provide services to you. So translators, for example, if you're going to use a sound company for meetings or doing recordings, if you're going to be using office space and you think you might have to pay for it, get quotes, get examples from specific vendors and have those. If you can't include them in your application, have them on hand or have them in a spreadsheet that you can submit to the funder if they ask to see them. Particularly in the North, our costs are higher. So funders often want to know, how did you arrive at these numbers? If there are policies, if there are travel per diem rates of government, use those. Use any rates that the funder might actually have on their website themselves so that they say, oh, those are our travel rates. Great. We know why we have those and where they come from. We have confidence in that. But you also have to be realistic. I've had a number of successful research proposals where on the website, funders have said, this is the upper limit of the amount. And I've often gone in asking for more than 50% more of what the funder says that they can give. And there have been times I have been successful in getting the full amount that I asked for, or at least getting more than what the website says is available. This is because funders often don't expend all of their money, or they themselves recognize that they haven't taken into account the higher costs in the North. Also, the peer reviewers might recommend that the funding agency provide you with additional funds. The worst that can happen is they will say no. So it's always my approach when I ask for funding, I go based on my real costs. I don't pretend that airfare from Yellowknife to Inuvik is going to cost $300. I look at the website of the airlines, I see that their top non-refundable ticket is $1,200, and that's what I ask for. That's reasonable, and those are the kinds of decisions that you'll need to make when you're working out a budget. So we've now talked about the idea, how to develop your idea, how to situate it within research priorities, and the partners in the engagement process, how to draft and finalize your application, and the administrative support and the institutional owner, that is the person who's going to take care of the funds for you, receive the money, cut the checks, make sure you're spending it on the right things. You've pulled all of that together. So in your resources, you will have 2 examples of successful grants that I've received. This slide just shows you the 1-page overview of what was a national conference that was held in Ottawa in 2015. And this was the basis for putting together a larger grant. So this was a connections grant that I submitted to SSHRC, and it was successful. So you will have access to that document. I've redacted some of that document to protect confidentiality of partners, but through this, you'll be able to get a sense of how a group of us, at the time it was the Land Claim Agreement Coalition, a group of us were responsible for getting together and developing a conference, and I was asked to submit the proposal. So this one page actually represents, probably a couple hundred hours of conversations with partners, with individuals, with academics, with elders, cultural knowledge holders, and community members. Similarly, this next proposal is after that successful conference, we then submitted a partnership grant. So for the conference, I think we got $25,000. And for this partnership grant, we got $2.5 million. So again, what you see in front of you here is a one-page description, which at that point was probably 400 hours, including the conference, of effort, conversations, research by people, literature reviews, some of the most distinguished academics in Canada working on land claim agreement related research who had come together and contributed to what would become a one-page overview, and then was a proposal which I think is around 100 pages long. And you have this proposal as well as part of your resources package. So I hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. Really, all of my experience comes from about 25 years as working as an academic, first doing my master's degree research in the Northwest Territories on the traditional knowledge policy of the GNWT. And I've done a lot of different research with different communities in the Northwest Territories. So in my experience, and I've had a number of successful proposals, and over the years, I think I've brought in over $12 million now to the Northwest Territories in tri-council research, as well as research from other funders. What always works for me is writing proposals in clear, plain language, using words that anyone can understand, whether it's tri-council or other funders. Always being clear about how Indigenous communities and Indigenous partners are involved in research proposals. And I don't just talk about that in my research proposals. I always get letters of support, whether or not they're included in submitting those to the funder, because it's really important to have that conversation and that formal acknowledgement and engagement, particularly with Indigenous governments and Indigenous communities. Because leading up to getting a letter, you have to have a lot of conversations, and you have to build relationships and have trust of people you're working with. The letter is just the evidence that you have done that work. Another thing I think that a lot of women and Indigenous peoples oftentimes have some difficulty when it comes to research proposal applications is being able to self-promote. When you're going to a funder, they want to have confidence that you're able to do the work. You really need to be clear, and you need to be honest about what you're capable of. No one is going to do this for you. And when peer reviewers are looking at funding proposals, or research officers are looking at funding proposals, they're not going to be looking at this thinking, this person is very humble and I need to take that into account. They just want to know the facts. So if you're in charge of things, if you've done research, talk about that, write about that in your proposal. Ask someone else who may have experience in submitting funding proposals to also give you advice on how to promote yourself and your abilities and capabilities, because funders do want to feel confident. So with that, I would just like to say Masucho Kuyanaimi, and I wish you all the best in writing your proposal.